Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, The Big Boolean Theory. This video is part of a lecture series on operating systems, and in this video we are going to solve another gate question. This gate question was asked in the year 2011 for 1 marks, and this question is related to the concept of interrupts, right? So let's read this question. A computer handles several interrupt sources, of which the following are relevant for this question. So we have four different sources of interrupts. The first one is interrupt from CPU temperature sensor. Raises an interrupt if the CPU temperature is too high, right? The second one is interrupt from mouse. Raises an interrupt if the mouse is moved or a button is pressed. Whenever there is a movement in the mouse will raise an interrupt. The third one is interrupt from keyboard. Raises interrupt when a key is pressed or released, right? And the final source of interrupt is interrupt from hard disk, which raises an interrupt when the disk read is completed, right? So these are the four different sources. All of these are hardware devices: the CPU temperature sensor, mouse, keyboard, and hard disk, right? So now the question is, which one of the following will be handled at the highest priority, right? So we have to, out of all these four devices, we have to say out of like the interrupt from which of these sources has the highest priority. So let's discuss each of these devices one by one and see whose interrupt has the highest priority. So if you see here, we have two different types of devices. One is the CPU temperature sensor, right? And the other type of devices that we have are the IO devices. So the CPU temperature sensor is just a sensor; it is not doing any input output. Whereas the other three devices are input or output devices, right? So let's see what happens if we delay in handling the interrupt from the CPU temperature sensor, right? So this temperature sensor is responsible for monitoring the temperature of the CPU chip. If the temperature is going too high beyond a certain critical threshold, then it has to raise an interrupt, right? Why this is necessary? Because if we do not do something to lower the temperature, then the chip will melt, right? So which will be like catastrophic, right? So we do not want the chip to be damaged. That is why we have a temperature sensor attached to the CPU, and its responsibility is to keep the temperature under check. So definitely this is the most highest priority interrupt, right? So let's also see the other devices and see how they compare against the CPU temperature sensor. The next we have the hard disk, keyboard, the mouse, and the keyboard, right? All of these are IO devices, and the worst thing the worst thing that can happen if we miss a interrupt from a keyboard is that the output, like basically the result of the key press, will not be visible on the screen, or some action which the user wanted will not be immediately visible, right? Again, the keyboard is very similar. Both keyboard and mouse are used for user input. If we delay in handling the input from the mouse, basically if we delay handling the interrupt from the mouse, then what will happen? Basically you will not be able to see the movement of the mouse, or what you would be expecting when mouse clicks are happening, right? So it's like your user interaction will be hampered. There will be lag, there will be unresponsiveness if the mouse interrupt is not handled, right, in a timely manner. And finally, if we talk about the hard disk, basically if we do not handle the interrupt that is coming from the hard disk, right, this interrupt is coming when the read operation is completed, right? Then what will happen is that the user process which would be waiting for the data to arrive, right, some user process would have requested that data. That is why that data is being transferred from the disk, that is why it is being read from the disk. So till the data is not available, it would be in a waiting state, it would be sleeping. Only when the data is available, then that user process would be woken up and put to ready state. So what will happen? The worst thing that will happen is that that user process, the running of that user process, the execution of that user process will be delayed if we do not handle the interrupt that has arrived from the hard disk. So in case of the hard disk, there will be a delay, like in waking up the user process, right? So there will be some delay in the further processing of that data. In case we miss the data that arrives from the mouse, we will have a sluggish user experience. Similarly, if we miss the interrupt from the keyboard, we will not be able to see the result that we expect from the typing of the key presses, right? So in all of these cases, these missing or delaying these interrupts are not fatal. But if we ignore the interrupt from the temperature sensor of the CPU, then the chip would altogether be damaged. So obviously, the interrupt that is coming from the temperature sensor of the CPU has the highest priority. And even in these IO devices, the highest priority is assigned to the one which has the highest rate of data, highest rate of incoming data. So the devices where the data is arriving at a higher rate, they will be assigned a higher priority compared to the slower devices. So as you can see, I have listed down the rough speeds that are there, like in the order of magnitudes, right? So for the disk, the speed is somewhere hundreds of megabytes per second. So when you're reading a file from the disk, the data arrives at a fast rate, right? The disk read happens in a bulk. So this data is somewhere around hundreds of megabytes per second. Whereas in the case of the mouse, the speed is, let's not talk about the mouse, let's go to the other extreme, that is the keyboard. The keyboard is quite slow. It depends on the human user who is typing. Human users type like characters at the rate of some like 10s or 20 key presses per second, right? Again, that is again a very fast number that I'm saying. It is a few key presses per second, and each key press, let's say it's a character, would be 1 byte. So the data that is arriving from the keyboard would be very limited, right? At the best, some kilobytes per second, right? So comparing the three devices, the hard disk is the fastest because we read the blocks from the hard disk, the data from the files in bulk, in big chunks. Whereas in the case of the keyboard, the data arrives at characters, a few characters per second, right? And the speed of the mouse is somewhere in between, right? When we move the mouse, right, we are generating the positional data, the x and y coordinates on the screen, and the speed of the mouse is much more higher than that of the keyboard, but still very slow as compared to that of the hard disk, right? The data that is generated by the mouse is not like in bulk. That is, it's again, it's much lesser in magnitude as compared to the hard disk. So this is how the order of interrupts would be. The highest priority interrupt would be the temperature one, the interrupt that is being raised by the temperature sensor of the CPU. Then would follow these IO devices. Even in these IO devices, the highest would be the one which is the fastest, and then depending on the speed, the priorities would be assigned. So the keyboard would have the lowest priority, and the mouse will have somewhere in between, right? So the answer is the interrupt from the CPU temperature sensor will be handled at the highest priority, because if it is not handled, if it is delayed, then we have severe consequences for the computer system, which we do not want to happen, right? So the answer is option D. So guys, this was it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.